he was starting to get jealous, and jealousy leads to hate, and hate
don't worry,
leads
we'll be
to the dark side.
I've loads of Yoda references in this episode. Well, not loads, I have maybe two. I was going to ask you to give us a bit of Yoda later on, but we've got a. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Council of Elrond, your weekly podcast on all things Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. On the podcast today, we've got a good one for you that I've really been looking forward to for quite a while. So many people will tell you that a great story is only as good as its villain, and in the Lord of the Rings, we have two fantastic villains. So we've already done a two-part episode on the Dark Lord Sauron. So today we're going to be looking at the cunning conjurer and evil enchanter, Saruman the White. I'm joined, as usual, by my brother and co-host, Dave. So welcome, Dave. How are you getting on? Are you looking forward to this episode?
Oh, yes. Very much looking forward to it. It's been a while in the making.
It's been cooking.
It's been coming a while.
So, of course, as always, guys, please check out all of our socials. The links are all in the description. We have our Patreon there as well. So if you want to support us, that's the best way to do it. And thank you to all of our sponsors there. And a special shout out to Jack Knightley. So let's get into the podcast.
The world is changing. Who now has the strength to stand against the armies of Isengard and Mordor? Stand against the might of Sauron and Saruman, and the union of the two towers.
So to kick off today's episode, Dave, I'm going to ask you a simple question, and that is, what order of being is Saruman? What is he?
What order of being? Right, so Saruman is a Maya. He's one of the Maiar, just like Gandalf the Grey, and
Correct.
Radagast and all the other, and the Balrogs and whatnot.
And Sauron as well.
And Sauron.
Very good. Yes, well done. Now, so yes, that's correct. He is a Maya. He also has another title of a being, as you said, a wizard. But what is a wizard in the Tolkien Legendarium?
So they actually say this in the final episode of the Rings of Power as well. They say he is the one, the Istar. So Istar, or plural Istari. And I think in the Middle Earth world, they're also just kind of known as wizards, but that's the kind of translation, wouldn't it be? The Istari?
Wizard or a wise man.
Yeah. Isn't it old wise man or just wise man? Yeah, it is wise man.
I think it's just wise man.
I think they took on the forms of old wise men.
They did.
Old wooden ships. But
they took on the forms of of diversity.
We talked about it before. I think it might have been in our previous episode where we mentioned that there might either be people that are conjurers or are able to use magic, but they're not on the same, like Istari is almost like a level, like the Maiar as well. The way there's all like god tier and then angel tier and all that kind of stuff. You can't just have like a random wizard, because we know there's only 5 Istari. No. But there might be some random other conjurers of cheap tricks.
Yeah, I'm sure there could be some other beings on Middle Earth that could probably learn from, like, under the tutelage of a wizard like Saruman or Gandalf or something like that. And yeah, of course, as we said, the names Sauron and Saruman, we're probably going to mix them up a couple of times today, because I'm going to be saying Saruman a lot, and then you're going to be like, wait, who?
Yeah.
Sauron? So he is Istar, or he's one of the Istari, and you could also say he is a Maya, one of the Maiar. So it gets a bit confusing. I'll try and break it down a little bit now, but also, where does he come from, Dave?
Who? Saruman. Where does he come from?
Yes.
He comes from up on high with the Maiar and the and the Valar, and I don't know,
the music of the Ainur, and all that kind of stuff.
They just come from not the void, but just like the eternal sunshine of a spotless mind.
Beautiful answer. Beautiful answer. Very good. Well, hang on. Sorry, no, I have another question that I wanted to ask.
All right.
Like, so what? Like, I'm looking for his origin story. That's what I want. I want to get Saruman's origin story. So, you might know that Gandalf used to be known as Olorin back in the day. Do you happen to know what Saruman used to be known as?
Oh, yeah.
I'll give you a clue.
Yeah, I could take a clue.
It begins with a C.
Karume or Karumo or
yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, Karumo.
Karumo. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Karumo. Exactly. Yeah.
Sounds
exactly.
pure
Karumo.
Japanesey. Karumo.
Yeah, it does sound a bit. Yeah, it does sound a little bit Japanese. So he was Karumo the Maya back in Valinor, back in his stomping ground, back in his youth. So as a Maya, Saruman was created by Eru Ilúvatar, like all the others in the music before the music of the Ainur. Sorry, and in his early days in Valinor, he went by Karumo or Tarindor as well, is another name he went by. And like Sauron, he was a powerful Maya of Aule. Okay,
right, yeah.
So we got to see a lot about Aule as well in the Rings of Power because they're all saying
Aule's beard.
Aule's beard. Exactly. You've got your D sit down. Nice, good job. So Aule was the smith. He was the Valar who was the smith, and so he was always out smithing, building, creating things. And so then Sauron and Saruman both would have like were kind of like his understudies. They kind of like learned from him. So just very quickly then, what's the difference between a Maya and an Istar? Well, the Maiar are the level of spirit beings that are below the Valar. And so Saruman, Gandalf, you said earlier, even Sauron, they were all Maiar along with Balrogs. However, Sauron was the most powerful of all the Maiar. And after the defeat of Morgoth, the Valar started getting a bit worried, and they were worried about the new kid on the block. They were like, "Oh, Sauron, he looks like he's the up and coming baddie in Middle Earth," and so his power was really increasing. And in Valinor, Manwë, who was the king of Valinor, basically the leader, he called a council, and he decided, in that council, they decided that they should send some Maiar as emissaries to Middle Earth to help the Free Peoples to challenge against Sauron. And the council likely met in the middle of the Second Age, which would have been basically just after the creation of the Rings of Power as well, just for context. The council determined that these emissaries, who became known as the Istari, or the wizards, should be, quote, mighty peers of Sauron, yet they should forego might and clothe themselves in flesh, so as to treat on equality and win the trust of elves and men. So that's a little quote there from the Unfinished Tales. I'll be reading a lot from the Unfinished Tales today. And that also kind of shows us that they're these powerful spirit beings, but when they came into Middle Earth, their purpose wasn't really just to kind of, to be strong and kill Sauron. They were to try and, lead the Free Peoples and win their trust and kind of be kind of guides and sort of, just kind of shoo them along in the right direction.
Like shepherds.
So, yeah, kind of like shepherds, exactly. So Karumo, anyway, our kid Saruman, as we know him as, he was sent to the council by Aule, and he volunteers then to travel to Middle Earth as an emissary. He was like, yeah, pick me, I want to go. And so he was appointed, and he became the first Istar, and he also became the chief of the order. And they were given physical form to appear as wise old men, and their Maiar powers were also restricted when they became Istari. So that's what I was saying before. Now, even before arriving in Middle-earth, Karumo begrudged his peers among the Istari. So, for example, Olorin, who became Gandalf, he didn't want to go to Middle-earth. He was, we know that he actually said that he was scared of Sauron, but he was commanded by Manwë to go as the third Istar. So they'd already chosen Saruman and Radagast, and then Gandalf was kind of forced into going. However, Saruman's jealousy kind of started here when Varda, who was Manwë's wife, she's the queen of Valinor, she said that Gandalf was, quote, not the third. So Saruman kind of took that to mean, oh, he's not the third, so maybe she feels that he's the third to be chosen, but he's actually number one in her opinion. So he kind of started to get a bit like, get the hump against Gandalf in that moment there. And then Saruman was kind of charged to take Radagast with him as well by Yavanna. Yavanna is the lover of all trees and gardens and stuff. So she forced Saruman to take his little brother Radagast, which he didn't want to do at all. And again, that kind of was the start of the contempt that Saruman had for Radagast. So Saruman just like really, he was like a moody teenager at this point. Like, you just like,
take your little brother out. Come on, like he has no friends. Just bring him out for a while. Yeah. Let him have some fun.
Yeah. So then Saruman and the other Istari, they arrived in Middle-earth on a ship at the Grey Havens in Lindon at around the year 1000 of the Third Age. And at the time of their arrival, their origin, nature, purpose, and their true names were secret to nearly everyone in Middle-earth. And so Círdan, who is the shipwright there at the Grey Havens, he was the only one to know the true identity and origin of these beings. And he chose to give his ring of fire, which is called Narya, he chose to give that to Gandalf, which is one of the elven rings of power, which we've spoken about so much before.
Another reason that probably pissed off Saruman as well. Like,
exactly.
Why are you giving it to number 3? I'm the leader.
Well,
I'm the chief.
He didn't give it to him. He didn't give it to him in front of all the rest of them. It was kind of more in secret. But Saruman did find out later. Yeah, Saruman found out about it later. Yeah, and that it was worse. It did lead to his kind of his ill will that he bore towards Gandalf again. It kind of just heightened that, and he kind of just like, God damn that guy. He's always just one upping me, getting one better. So then, shortly after arriving, Saruman actually travelled east of Middle Earth, as did the 2 blue wizards, and he spent about 1.5 millennia out there in the east, and then after that time he came back west, just as Sauron's power was again starting to grow in Dol Guldur. So we know that Gandalf said that he never went east, and he never goes east because, I don't know, a bit creepy out there, and doesn't smell so good down there. And Gandalf's just going around following his nose. So he's like, don't go east. Stinks over there. Yeah. So again, maybe there's another thing behind that of Saruman spending some time in the east with all those kind of dodgy tribes out there that end up, like the Easterlings and all that kind of stuff. So maybe that's something else that kind of influenced him later. But at this point, he wasn't evil or anything. He just, starting to get a bit cranky. Yeah. Cranky Saruman.
He was starting to get jealous. So, and, jealousy leads to hate, and hate don't worry, leads to the dark side.
I've loads of Yoda references in this episode. Not loads, I have maybe 2. I was going to ask you to give us a bit of Yoda later on, but we've got So, just also, let's just try and think of some other names for Saruman. Do you know any other possible names or titles that he went by? So the obvious ones, I suppose.
Brendan. He went by Brendan when he was in the east. Karumo, Saruman. I think I'm
Saruman
Saruman the White, obviously, and then Saruman later, Saruman of many colors, or
correct,
Saruman and his multicolored Technicolor Dreamcoat or whatever.
Exactly. The White Wizard.
The White Wizard, yeah. Okay. So, yeah.
The White Messenger, he was called. He was called the Jailer of Mordor by Gandalf at one point. When cool. Gandalf came back after he had imprisoned Gandalf. And then Gandalf was resurrected and came back and saw him again. He called him the Jailer of Mordor. He was known as Saruman the Wise.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned Saruman of many colors. Just to quickly explain that, when... he kind of outgrows his white and he thinks he's better than it. And so he makes this kind of multicolored coat, which is kind of magical in his own way. That he kind of was able to break the spectrum of light, which was, not something that people knew how to do back then. And he split white into all the different colors. And he thought he was just the bee's knees. He thought he was class. So his last name that I'm going to give you was Sharky.
Oh, he was known as. I remember that now.
Can you remember anything around that name? When did he get that name, or why was he called that, or anything like that?
No. No, I remember us talking about it in another episode before, but Sharky.
You sure do.
Why the hell?
So he was called Sharky. Sharku in Orcish means old man. And
that's the name of one of the orcs as well.
It is.
Sharku.
2 of the orcs, I believe.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And at the end of The Lord of the Rings, what we don't get to see in the films, we get this part which is called the Scouring of the Shire.
Right.
And it's when Saruman goes and he kind of takes over the Shire. And then there's a big battle called the Battle of the Bywater. And Saruman ultimately gets defeated there. But in that place, he was called Sharky.
By the hobbits.
There, and by everyone, really. I think he just kind of went by this sort of little... he was like, all right, call me Sharky. I'm not Saruman anymore. Right?
Yeah, he just had a phase where he just basically went down there and he's like, I'm ditching Saruman. He's like, I'm going to be somebody else. I'm a vigilante now. Call me Sharky.
He had an identity crisis. He wasn't sure who he was anymore. So just to quickly look at that Battle of the Bywater then, as it was called, in the chapter called The Scouring of the Shire at the end of The Lord of the Rings. Jumping to the end of the story and to Saruman's demise. Well, firstly, Dave, I'd like to ask you, what do you remember about his death in the movies? Let's look at that first.
Well, in the movies.
Can you remind our listeners how he goes out, and also let me know what are your thoughts on that scene?
Ah, right. Well, listeners, for those who haven't seen the extended edition of the Return of the King, isn't it?
Who are you talking to? There are no people.
There are people
that have never seen it.
There's plenty. You should see them on Twitter. Loads of people like, what scene is this from? I'm like, oh my god, my mind is blown. But anyways, the Saruman, he gets his death scene is cast aside and is put into the extended editions where he's basically atop of his tower, exchanging insults with Gandalf the White, Theoden, Legolas, Gimli, and that's it. Maybe, Éomer as well. And then basically he shoots a lovely fireball down on Gandalf, and Gandalf like completely resists it. And then Legolas eventually shoots. Oh no, Grima comes up to stab Saruman, and Legolas shoots Grima, kills the poor lad, and Saruman falls all the way on top of a big spiky, pointy wheel thing and dies.
Gets nicely impaled. Yeah.
I saw a scene the last day of the actor that plays Grima, and he's like acting out the whole stabbing thing, and then he just like turns to the camera, he's like, you should see me with a 45 Magnum or something like 45 millimeter Magnum.
Deadly. I love how like 20 years later, all these actors are still just like, that was the greatest moment of my career.
Yeah.
They're just still good on about it. But so as you rightly said there, that his scene was cut from the theatrical editions, which was very controversial, I would say, to have such a huge character and a huge villain to not have his plot correctly wrapped up. So I was looking up stuff about this to see if I could find anything, and I just took something here from screenrant.com. So if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to read this just 2 paragraphs here, where it says, Peter Jackson opted to remove this scene from the theatrical cut of The Return of the King very late in production, replacing it with a short line of dialogue in which the threat of Saruman is revealed to have subsided. Jackson's reasons for cutting Saruman's demise were twofold. Firstly, to pare down a film that was already testing the limits of how long a person can comfortably sit on a theatre seat, and secondly, because of the narrative flow. Jackson claimed in a 2003 interview that the scene was originally intended for the end of the Two Towers movie, but removed in order to wrap up the second film faster. While the director originally thought to place the material at the start of The Return of the King, this created an opening that was more about mopping up past plot threads rather than starting new ones, and so the sequence was cut, with Jackson figuring most viewers would simply assume Saruman was defeated by the Ents. In reality, this editing decision was received far worse than could have been anticipated. Christopher Lee reacted particularly badly to being cut from the final film, reportedly not attending the premiere as a result. This drove a wedge between the actor and director that was eventually healed in advance of Lee's return in The Hobbit. Audiences were left equally unimpressed, wondering what fate befell Saruman after his defeat in the Two Towers, and claiming that a villain of such stature deserved a more fitting end than a mere throwaway line. A petition was even set up requesting the wizard's axed death scene be restored. Under pressure from viewers and legendary actor who sings heavy metal in his spare time, Jackson conceded a mistake had been made and restored the scene in the extended version of The Return of the King, finally making Saruman's death a genuine part of the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy's canon. So that was just a little excerpt from screenrant.com. So a couple of cool things in there, and they had a little mention of Christopher Lee's heavy metal playing as well, which is kind of cool.
That's cool. I'd heard that before, all right, that it drove a wedge between the two. But what I didn't know there, what did you... Oh, yeah, so... Are you saying that this article is suggesting that this was actually going to be a deleted scene and not even making it into the extended edition? Because
that's what this article is suggesting. I don't know how. I mean, people, you can do your own research, but that seems like
this just calls for, Matt from Nerd of the Rings. He's talked about he wants to have the Mithril edition sometime. We've had the Blu-ray, the 4K, but we need the Mithril edition, which includes all the deleted scenes in the archives, because we know that there are so many other scenes that were shot, like Arwen at Helm's Deep. There's loads of extra scenes of the hobbits messing around. And
Éowyn at Helm's Deep as well.
Éowyn fighting at Helm's Deep, again. So there's so many that are shot, but like probably aren't edited perfectly. But just that scene alone at the start of The Return of the King of Saruman dying, like that, that's edited to perfection at this point. And I know they probably mulled over it with lots of time, and they could have done reshoots and all that.
I don't know how much of this article that I would believe. I'd say that maybe it was a strong possibility that scene would have ended up in the extended cut, because it says that it was quite late when Jackson decided to cut it from the actual original theatrical release. So
I know, there must be so many other scenes that are just so late being cut.
But it's interesting. Obviously, what happened was the theatrical scenes or the theatrical movies came out, and then people maybe saw some still images of the behind the scenes thing of Christopher Lee, or they heard him publicly claiming that he was cut out, and so then the petition was started. And maybe all the while Jackson had in his mind, he was like, "Yeah, don't worry, it's going to be in the extended one." So I don't know really what how it lined up, but it is interesting that that a petition was actually created to have him to have his ending reinstated and to have his death scene put in.
I want to see that deleted scene of Frodo where he visions himself becoming like Smeagol. You've seen those photographs, have you? Of like Frodo,
I have,
where he's all like, he looks like Smeagol through his transformation, but that looks really cool, and they definitely put a lot of time and effort into shooting that, and it never made it to any edition of Lord of the Rings. So
that's the thing about movies like this of this scale, the amount of stuff that they must spend, like
that are thrown to the
amount of money and time that they spend, like just putting it, like the effort as well of shooting some certain scenes. And that scene of Frodo's transformation, it probably would have been again like a 5-second clip of just like him just at different stages, but it didn't even make it into, as you said, in any of the versions.
Yeah, and sure, remember when we interviewed Dallas Barnett on this podcast before, and he talked about like he gets a 3-second shot of just his face close up in the pub, and he basically said that him and Peter Jackson directed him to do scenes of him and the squid, I think, or the squint, like walking down the street with their swords out looking for. Oh yeah, they were like chasing. They had like a chase scene, and he had to like bash into something as well, and like all that.
He had to hop over this cart and
do a little bit of a stunt. Well, anyways, to our listeners, send us a message and let us know what deleted scene you'd like to see appear in the Mithril edition, because I really want that.
Get it out there
and sign the petition as well.
Give us the Mithril cut.
Yeah, the Mithril cut.
So anyway, getting back to this part here also, and to that scene that we've just talked about, the scene of Saruman being stabbed in the back by Grima and eventually falling down and plummeting to his death. Dave, is there any other fun behind the scenes story that you can think about that happened between Christopher Lee and Peter Jackson during the film of this particular scene?
Of course, I was going to mention
Would you like to tell our listeners?
Again, if anyone hasn't seen the behind the scenes of this, Peter Jackson was directing Sir Christopher Lee, of course, because he's the director, and he's telling him to like get stabbed and go like and let out a scream, but Christopher Lee was like, do you know what a man actually does when he gets stabbed? And he's like, basically the breath is being sucked out of him, because if he's getting stabbed in the lungs, he's like the breath is being drawn away from him. So you can see this in Christopher Lee's acting. He's getting stabbed and he's like he's like taking gas.
These sharp inhales.
The sharp inhales. So like that's just a brilliant little story from Peter Jackson.
And they were like, okay, this is a man who was in the Secret Service during the World War stuff, so let's just take his word and don't ask any more questions. So they're like, moving on quickly, which we're going to do now as well. So we're going to move on quickly because I want to talk about the death of Saruman, his death according to the books, so not the extended version of the Return of the King movie.
Right.
So the death of Saruman is something, as we said, the one that we see in the movies, that's what Peter Jackson came up with, but that's not canon at all, according to what Tolkien wrote. So again, Dave, I'll come to you and I'll put it out there. Do you remember how he went down in the books?
Yeah, so at the Battle of the Bywater, I don't remember the specifics, but I think he just gets overthrown by the hobbits, and like all the orcs are getting overthrown as well. And eventually it's the same situation where Grima is the one to stab him. And I think he gets stabbed in the back, just like in the movie. Or is it in the dick?
I think it might be in the...
Was it the dick?
I think it's in... Is it in the neck? Does he get him?
The neck?
Maybe it's in the back.
Or in the knee.
I can't remember.
He does a pure Mary on it. He's like, huzzah!
What am I thinking about? No, I'm thinking about something weird. Oh, no, sorry. When I thought about the neck, I'm getting my stabbings mixed up. It's when a lot of people, there's another thing that people ask. They're like, oh, how come... when Frodo's wearing his mithril vest and he gets stabbed by Shelob, how can you get stabbed when he's wearing his shirt? Because Shelob stabs him in the neck.
Oh, right. Oh, sorry, right.
With her stinger.
Yeah.
Yeah, she gets him in the neck. Sorry, that was me thinking of that. So yeah, I think Saruman does get stabbed in the back. But anyway, yes, you are correct. So when he actually escapes the Tower of Orthanc eventually, he doesn't exactly he negotiates
because
with the Ents.
and
he kind of just says, "Look,
the keys of
I've no
Orthanc
more
now."
power." Yeah, he's got the keys to Orthanc. He's like, "I'm keeping all your stuff." And then so Saruman's just like, "Okay, you can keep all my stuff. I'm out of here." And he leaves, and then he goes back and he takes over the Shire in Frodo's absence and all the rest of the guys. So then when the four hobbits return, they find that the Shire is entirely under Saruman's dominion, and he's going by this name Sharky now. And so they have to...
They're like, oh, by the way, Frodo, some guy called Sharky's taking over the Shire. And Frodo just shows up and like, you again?
It's like Scooby-Doo. He pulls off the mask. He's like, "This is a Sharky. That's Saruman."
Well, if it isn't our old friend Bluestone the Great.
So then, after losing the Battle of the Bywater, Saruman is stabbed and killed by Grima Wormtongue. Right, very good. So, anyway, moving on. I want to look at another little question, which is, we know that Saruman imprisoned Gandalf at one point, and we know that Saruman always kind of lusted after powerful artifacts like the Palantir and things like that. And he knew, as we said before, he knew that Gandalf had a ring of power because he found out that was one of the reasons he got a bit more pissy at Gandalf. He was like, felt annoyed that he had been overlooked, and he was like, "I should have got that ring. Why did he give it to Gandalf?" So the question is, why didn't he take that ring when he knew that Gandalf had it and he was his prisoner?
This is Narya, is it? Narya, the ring of...
Narya, yeah. Don't be trying to get out of it now and telling me that you know the name of the ring, because that's nothing to do with the question.
Well, it would make a big difference now if it was Vilya or if it was Nenya.
Oh, Jesus, yeah.
I don't... Did Saruman... I actually don't know. I don't know that one. All right.
That's a good
idea. He should have taken the ring. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, what powers did the rings of power have?
Because the ring was invisible. And Saruman couldn't see the ring, and therefore he was like...
That's a good point. That's a good point. The ring was invisible to anyone who wasn't a ring bearer, and so Saruman wouldn't have been able to see it on his finger. But I'd say it was still physically there. It was just kind of, it had some like special stealth thing going on. And
sure,
like,
Smeagol probably would be able to see Frodo, and he managed to get the ring off.
Yeah, exactly. He could have just like felt around Gandalf's fingers and be like, "There it is now."
What are you doing?
But that's not that's not a good. That's not a bad answer. But so let's just think about the powers that the three rings had. The three elven rings. They didn't really have destructive powers. They were built more to restore Middle Earth and to heal it and to prolong it and all that kind of stuff. So they didn't want to. They weren't like, he wouldn't be able to take this ring and have powers to wage war against Middle Earth and try and defeat Sauron, which was his ultimate goal at this point. Yes.
Is the answer because then it would be connected to the other two rings and he didn't want any of that crack as well? He didn't want to be like, oh, but then like the others have me on speed dial.
You are almost correct. It's not that it would be connected to those other two. It would be connected to a different ring.
The one ring. And he doesn't want...
Yes.
Okay. But he wants the one ring himself.
Yeah, but it's a bit of a gamble. So at this point, Saruman definitely wants the one ring.
Yeah.
So that's his main goal. And he's also kind of aligned himself with Sauron. He's like, okay, I'm Team Sauron, blah, blah.
Right.
And so, but at the same time, so he's saying to Sauron, like to his face, oh yeah, no worries, Sauron. I'm your guy. I'm with you. I will be, I will serve you. You will be my, master. But all the time he was he was thinking, I'm going to try and find the One Ring before you. And so he knew that if he found the One Ring first, he would possibly be able to overthrow Sauron and he would rule Middle-earth. But if Sauron found the One Ring first, and then Saruman would have ended up being his servant. But also, if he had taken the Elven Ring and Sauron got the One Ring, then Sauron would have been like, oh, I can see your mind. I can see your thoughts. Your plan is to overthrow me. And so... that would have been a huge gamble. And then also, as I said, the power of these elven rings wasn't really enough to really help Saruman in his ultimate goal anyway. So it kind of just wouldn't have been worth it.
Would you not think, though, that the will of Saruman would have been so great that he could prevent Sauron from looking into his mind? Like, I know it takes him a long time to first use the Palantir, but isn't that one of the things with the Palantirs?
Probably not if Sauron got his hands on the One Ring.
Okay.
That would probably just make him too powerful for anyone. And definitely would have been made him too powerful for Saruman, even though Saruman had incredibly strong will and was, all of his powers that he had.
But would you not think Saruman is thinking, well, if Sauron finds the One Ring first, then I'm screwed anyways, because he's going to be the leader, then my ambition of getting the One Ring is gone. So I may as well get this One Ring that connects to the One Ring, and then therefore that would help me in my pursuit of it. I
don't think it would help him in his pursuit of it at all. I don't think it had, because the One Ring controls the three Elven Rings, not vice versa.
I know, but you know.
But now what you were saying there was that the thing is, there's a very big difference between Sauron getting the One Ring first and then continuing on as if nothing happened, kind of saying, now I have the One Ring, fantastic, and my trusty Saruman is here beside me. He's my lieutenant. He's my first in command. He's still below me, but he's, whatever. Mm-hmm. If he got the One Ring and was like, oh, this guy's trying to betray me, he wouldn't have taken that lightly. He would be like, well, you're dead.
Yeah.
1,000 years of torture and misery for you, please, and then death. So, Sauron was not just like, let it go. He's a good guy, So,
he was a bad guy.
He was a bad guy. So that's the story there. But I do want to look also at kind of Saruman's progression into evil and why did he hate Gandalf so much, and how did the events play out that led to his downfall. So we already mentioned a couple of things, like when he was first in Valinor and that Varda, the queen, she said the whole thing like, oh, Gandalf, he's not third. That was one of the first things that kind of got under his skin and made him a little bit resentful towards Gandalf. And then he became, as we said, more jealous when Círdan gave Gandalf the ring ahead of him, and he felt that he was overlooked and that he deserved that ring more. I also mentioned that when he traveled to the east and he spent lots of time with these kind of more, quote, evil people, I suppose, could have had some sort of an effect on him, although we don't really actually know that. We're just kind of speculating. Then we have the White Council, which was the council that was set up. We see that play out in the Hobbit movies. We see some parts of the council. It's where you've got Elrond, Galadriel, Gandalf, Saruman, and others, Círdan and some other people as well, are on this council, and it's all the highest and best and most intellectual, important beings, the most eligible bachelors, basically, of Middle-earth. So when that was being created and formed, Gandalf was recommended by Galadriel to be the leader. And this was, again, much to Saruman's disgust and annoyance. And Gandalf actually refused and turned down this recommendation. But Saruman still just hated him for it. And he felt, he was entitled. He's like, I'm the leader of the Istari. Surely I'm the wisest and the most powerful. I have to be the leader of this as well. So his pride was hurt, basically. And the council, the reason the council exists was it was formed to try to defend Middle-earth against Sauron. And Saruman, who already knew more than anyone else about crafting rings and Sauron's power, he started to study Sauron ever more deeply then after the creation of this White Council. And he started to study the lore of the Rings of Power. And perhaps this is when his attraction to this evil started to take root. But at this point, he still wasn't evil. It was just like he still had good intentions. But his pride and jealousy and desire for power were all starting to take hold of him. And as we saw before, that sounds kind of like something that Master Yoda would say, and he might have a word to them and sit him down like a young Jedi going down the wrong path and just say like, pride leads to anger.
Fear leads to jealousy. Jealousy leads to hate. And hate leads to the dark side.
Does hate not lead to suffering?
Suffering. Suffering.
It's like, come on, Yoda, wrap it up. He's got a list of 45 things he's going on.
It leads to
envy. You're like,
and
okay.
Envy leads to grief. Grief leads to despair.
Wrap it up, Yoda. Come on.
Yeah,
so
this leads to boredom, Yoda.
So his pride and his jealousy meant that he would eventually stop cooperating with his White Council buddies, and no matter whatever he learned, he just kind of kept that to himself. He also started using the Palantir often, like behind the back of the White Council as well. They didn't know that he had it, so he was there, using the Palantir, and so just really kind of starting to go down a bad path, really.
Yeah.
So there are also signs as well to show that Saruman had started to become very prideful, and that his evil intentions started before he ever had contact with Sauron through the Palantir. And because we know we're given a date that he actually first contacted Sauron in the year 3000 of the Second Age. But we know that about 150 years before that, he was already doing these kind of shady things, and he was well on his way down the path to the dark side. So that's something that's kind of like, it makes you realize that Saruman's failure as an Istar and his fall to the dark side was his own choice, really, and can't be blamed on any sort of manipulation from Sauron as well. So
definitely.
Just something to think about there. So
food for
looking
thought.
Food for thought. Looking at the One Ring for a moment as well, where Sauron started Saruman started studying Sauron, and he started studying the forging of the Rings of Power more and more, and he stopped seeing Sauron as evil, and he kind of thought of him more as a rival, and he kind of even like respected his work and his creation, especially the One Ring. He was like, that's class. It's a real ring, like deadly ring. So here we start to see him intentionally mislead the White Council. It's not just hiding stuff from them anymore. He's actually there giving fake news. He's like, oh, I think that this happened. And so he tells them that the One Ring, he tells them that he's got strong evidence to prove that the One Ring has been lost forever in the Great Sea. And he's like, yeah, pretty sure it's gone, guys. Yeah, it's not around. There's no point.
The sea or the river?
In the sea.
Oh, he says it's in the sea.
Yep, it's in the sea.
Scoundrel.
I know, yeah. Sneaky. Like, as in, he's like, says it went into the Anduin, and it basically, he's like, oh, it flowed down the river and went out into the sea.
Of course it did.
And this is all done so that, like, the White Council would stop searching for the ring, or they wouldn't even, they would kind of, like, just forget about it, hopefully, over time, giving Saruman the advantage to finding it before any of them. But, of course, he would still have to find it before Sauron found it. And then when Gandalf suggested to the White Council that they should attack Dol Guldur and attack the Necromancer, Saruman stepped in and stopped it. And his motivation was that the One Ring might reveal itself as Sauron's power grew, and that then he might be able to find it and claim it for his own. So instead of trying to stop Sauron finding the one thing that he needed to take over Middle-earth, he actually chose to risk everything just for his own selfish lust of this ring. He was like, oh yeah, I mean, stop Sauron. Yeah, okay, that's fine. But maybe I could get that One Ring. So he's like, I'll let Sauron just keep growing there for a while. So,
stupid, so greedy.
Yeah, jerk.
He can just
So
like
then-
he's touched the darkness too much. As
Too much
Finrod would
touching.
say.
Yeah, he's poking the darkness at this point. So we know that, like, I mean, he's got a serious superiority complex, and he definitely needed to speak to a psychiatrist. And he started to hate Gandalf because everybody liked Gandalf, and Gandalf was maybe not as great as Saruman in terms of raw power, but he was really wise and influential, and Saruman started to become a bit stalkerish. Then after a while, he took a lot of interest in Gandalf's coming and goings, and he thought a lot about anything that Gandalf said, and he was a bit intimidated by Gandalf. And so he started to openly mock and humiliate Gandalf, just kind of like a jealous child would, I suppose. And he also started to secretly copy things that Gandalf did, such as smoking pipeweed in private, even though he would publicly criticize Gandalf for doing that. So I've got my unfinished tales out here. I'm just going to read a couple of quotes. So reading here from the chapter called The Hunt for the Ring, it says, "Yet in truth, Saruman's spying and great secrecy had not in the beginning any evil purpose, but was no more than a folly born of pride. Small matters, unworthy it would seem to be reported, may yet prove of great moment ere the end. Now, truth to tell, observing Gandalf's love of the herb that he called pipeweed, Saruman had affected to scoff at it, but in private he made trial of it, and soon began to use it, and for this reason the Shire remained important to him. Yet he dreaded lest this should be discovered, and his own mockery turned against him, so that he would be laughed at for imitating Gandalf, and scorned for doing so by stealth. This was the reason for his great secrecy in all his dealings with the Shire, even from the first before any shadow of doubt had fallen upon it." So,
Interesting. In that little passage, we have the words "scorned" and "Shire" twice. So wait, is what I'm to gather here is that he found the Shire important just because it produced pipeweed, and he's like, well, I can't attack them until much later, and I'm going to stay away from wherever they like
Look,
create the pipe
Saruman,
weed.
Saruman got hooked on the ganja, right? Okay,
Yeah, I know. And he's
he
like,
got a bad dose, and then so he would like sneak into the Shire, like he would almost use kind of magic to kind of hide himself. He'd sneak in because that's where all the great dealers were, and then he'd even start to meddle in the Shire later on. He'd put spies in place and all around, like in Bree, he had his spies. And he did a lot of this because it kind of also gave him satisfaction just to kind of mess around with an area that was kind of dear to Gandalf. And secondly, because he'd become so paranoid from all that weed, and he'd become so obsessed with gaining power and status that he couldn't imagine anyone else would be different. So he assumed that Gandalf had his own selfish reasons for having an interest in the Shire. So he was like, I reckon Gandalf probably thinks that the One Ring is in the Shire and he's trying to find it for himself. Like, so it kind of reminds me of Sauron being so power hungry that he couldn't even start to contemplate that someone would want to destroy the One Ring instead of trying to take it for themselves. So we spoke about that in our Sauron episode, that he was just so like, what do you mean that someone would try to destroy this ring? It's so powerful. Of course, anybody who comes near it will want to claim it for themselves. So when it turned, but then the weird thing was that when it turned out that the One Ring was in fact in the Shire, that only confirmed like what Sauron had thought all along. He was like, I knew it. I knew that Gandalf was really behind my back trying to find the One Ring without my help and without telling me. And that made him even more pissed off because he was like, and I'm the expert at rings, and Gandalf didn't even bother to come and try and tell me. So there's actually a really cool passage in the Unfinished Tales that I'm going to read as well, which gives us a glimpse of the White Council meeting in the year 2851. And in it, Saruman was advised against an attack on Dol Guldur. So reading here, during the council meeting, it says that Gandalf sat apart while Saruman spoke against him, and he urged that contrary to Gandalf's advice, Dol Guldur should not yet be molested. And continuing here, he says, both the silence and the smoke seemed greatly to annoy Saruman, and before the council dispersed, he said to Gandalf, quote, when weighty matters are in debate, Mithrandir, I wonder a little that you should play with your toys of fire and smoke while others are in earnest speech. But Gandalf laughed and replied, you would not wonder if you use this herb yourself. You might find that smoke blown out cleared your mind of shadows within. Anyway, it gives patience to listen to error without anger. So it's a serious dig. He's like, I'm just chilling here and you're spewing such nonsense, but I don't mind because I'm high as a kite. Yeah. So Saruman was pretty annoyed by this, and he answered coldly. It says, you jest, Lord Mithrandir, as is your way. I know well enough that you have become a curious explorer of the small, weeds, wild things, and childish folk. Your time is your own to spend if you have nothing worthier to do, and your friends you may make as you please. But to me, the days are too dark for wanderers' tales, and I have no time for the simples of peasants. Then it says that Gandalf did not laugh again, and he did not answer, but looking keenly at Saruman, he drew on his pipe and sent out a great ring of smoke, with many smaller rings that followed it. Then he put up his hand, as if to grasp them, and they vanished. With that, he got up and left Saruman without another word. But Saruman stood for some time silent, and his face was dark with doubt and displeasure. So,
it just makes me think that like Tolkien definitely came into contact with some other professors who, you know, were like, Professor, can you please put your pipe out? Like, that's very distracting when we're trying to talk about serious matters here. And he's like, hold your pipe down there, over there.
He's like, I'll show them in my book.
Yeah, exactly. So, they're going to write you and you're going to be the bad guy.
Yeah. But the cool thing there is the last part that I was saying about like the smoke, blowing the smoke rings. And then trying to grab at the rings as well, because that action kind of fueled Saruman's paranoia. And
for Saruman.
Yeah, well, he was like kind of going, because then Saruman was wondering if those were representing the rings of power. And there's actually another part in the book that suggests that this is a warning from Gandalf to Saruman that the rings of power would eventually elude him. That like he was trying to grasp them and they were just disappearing, these smoke rings. So it was like, no matter how much you try, you're never going to be able to get them. So
yeah,
interesting.
That's cool. Yeah, that's a cool little metaphor for him. I also just like how I love that the way that Saruman is like thinking that Gandalf is, you know, hanging out in the Shire, because he's like, oh, the ring is definitely there, but it's just all about the kush.
Got the great prices, man.
No, yeah, it's all about the ganja, Saruman. Yeah. And like having to send his own little scouts and spies.
Bring
because
the kush
you know,
to me.
yeah, because like in the Fellowship of the Ring, the movie, he says like the love of the halfling's leaf has clearly slowed your mind. So he's like slagging him off for smoking.
Yeah.
But then in the Return of the King, we find in the extended edition where Merry and Pippin raid one of his stores, he's got 2 big barrels of pipeweed. So that's something cool as well that they put that in the movie as well.
That is cool.
So,
I never
yeah,
thought
obviously
about that. I kind of just assumed, like, I know they call it Saruman. What do they call it? Saruman, his like storehouse or storeroom. But like, I didn't know that was all for Saruman. I thought like maybe that's for, you know, some of the staff and the clientele that are working in Isengard. Like maybe not the Uruk-hai, but I don't know. Surely there's some men.
No, that
around
was
the place.
Saruman's private stash. That's what it was. Yeah.
But it's on the wall.
Anyway.
It's like built into the wall, isn't it? I would have thought like all Saruman stuff is like in Orthanc itself.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I mean, you know, we don't know where. I don't remember if it says in the book where his actual little like storage, his little pantry was. I'm not sure. Maybe he had one inside the Tower of Isengard, but they just showed it in the movies out there where the boys were. But anyway, moving on. In the years to come, Saruman began to create his own force to compete with Sauron, and he crafted his own ring of power as well. Did you know this, Dave? So it is said that Saruman made this
A lesser ring, surely.
It's a lesser ring, yes, but it was a ring of power. But I mean, yeah.
Cool.
We don't know too much about it, but I'm going to read a little bit from what I could find about this ring. So it says that this ring was made in envy of Sauron's abilities to create powerful and great rings of power. At this point in time, all of the knowledge of how to create rings of power had been long lost. People didn't really remember, I suppose.
But since Saruman was like under the tutelage of Arome or Aule, the smith, then he would have always known how to kind of make
He would have
rings.
known how to make stuff, like how to make things, but Sauron was the main, like he was the main master of
But I mean, like,
rings, I suppose.
it's not truly lost if Saruman was under the tutelage of Aule. Like, you know.
No, not everything, but I suppose Sauron discovered the little, like, you know, he found the secret ingredient, I suppose. And, you know, he probably, he didn't even share all of it with Celebrimbor when he made the rings. So, yeah, anyway, most people were just like, they didn't know how to do it. And Saruman was really studying the lore and trying to make his own ring. So in the book, in the Fellowship of the Ring, it is stated that Saruman had a certain ring around his finger. And Saruman said, quote, "For I am Saruman the Wise, Saruman Ringmaker." And Saruman was also researching a certain ring lore, which also stated in the Fellowship of the Ring book. It says here, another quote, "Saruman, failing to get possession of the One Ring, would have found in Mordor the missing links in his own researches into ring lore. And before long, he would have made a great ring of his own with which to challenge the self-styled ruler of Middle-earth." So if he had gone to study in Mordor, if he'd gone to find the archives in Mordor, maybe he would have found the missing links and he could have possibly made his own ring as powerful as Sauron's, maybe. However, the powers of the ring were never revealed, and Saruman, he made a big claim that, you know, it was really powerful and like had a lot of potency, but you know, nobody knew. He was like, "My ring's the best ring, you guys, okay? So just don't ask any questions. I'm not going to give you any demonstrations, but just trust me. It's pretty bad." Okay?
I'm never going to trust a guy who calls himself Sharky. Like, just, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. So we're going to move on. We're going to talk about his powers for a little bit as well. Okay. So, but before we do, we should always remember that in the Lord of the Rings, it's not high fantasy like Harry Potter, and it is based in the world which would eventually become our Earth. So the laws of physics are in place and they are followed for the most part the same way as in our own world. So
apart from Legolas, of course, he doesn't follow the laws of physics.
Not at all. He's got his own whole thing going on. He just lives in an alternate dimension.
Yeah, standing on snow, jumping up fallen rocks. He does it all. Climbing up a horse in the opposite direction.
I reckon Orlando Bloom could be like that in real life.
Yeah,
I've never met him.
That's probably true.
It seems like something that he would be able to do. So anyway, the word magic then, I suppose, if we take that word, it's often very subtle in Lord of the Rings and in Tolkien's writing. It's not it's not like people shooting fireballs out their arse or anything like that. Like, it's not.
That's
like,
what I do after a heavy night of Mexican food.
Oh yeah, exactly. I made my own hot sauce recently. Actually,
I saw that.
I never
yeah.
told you. Oh,
You
did
know,
you? Oh,
you
did
did.
you? Oh yeah.
And
Did I? Oh, I did.
Would you
I
like
sent it
to
a
share
group.
the name of this hot sauce?
I will not. I will keep that to myself. You know, trademarking and all that. You know, I'm gonna
Exactly,
make
yeah.
a whole brand.
Yeah, very good. I'm excited to taste it.
No, I will. I'll tell people. I called it Johnny's "How's your arse hot sauce?" because that's what you need to ask each other the following day after you eat. You're like, "How's your arse?" You're like, "Oof, it's not great now. The hot sauce is pretty bad." So anyway, moving on from my hot sauce. What was I saying? I completely lost my train of thought.
How's your head?
Something about Saruman. So anyway, sometimes it's not easy to see the powers of the wizards, like Gandalf as well. Sometimes we don't know exactly what his powers are, and he has a lot of very subtle powers that maybe go unnoticed. So some people might think that this is a bit of a missed opportunity, and it could be cool to have wizardly powers like the genie in Aladdin or something. But personally, I definitely prefer it this way. And even if sometimes you're not sure if something was just like mere luck or if it was actually magic, it's kind of cool to have that, like, oh, I don't know, maybe there was some sort of magic involved there.
Yeah.
So Saruman is portrayed as being of great knowledge, and some of his actions may have been perceived as crazy magic by people who lived in that time. But the reality is just a lot of his powers were just science ahead of his time. Because he was known for making devices such as bombs.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah, exactly. Like, and Green is just like, how can this bring down stone? What are you talking about? This is madness.
Fire bring down stone. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So that's a lot of it as well. So, and even Gandalf admits that it was thanks to the devices of Saruman that Dol Guldur was destroyed. So we don't get too much more information about that, but that's kind of cool as well. He was like Da Vinci,
Einstein.
like he was like the Da Vinci of his time. Yeah, and he was just thinking up these inventions beyond the realms of imagination of the others. So, he's a real Renaissance man, I suppose. Saruman.
Leonardo da Sharkey.
But apart from these acts of intelligence, he also did possess gifts that some may consider unnatural. And what's the one that stands out, Dave, when I say what are Saruman's powers?
I don't know. Intelligence?
When you just think of Saruman compared to like more than Gandalf, for example, he definitely has one. It's an entire chapter dedicated to it. Go on black. I'll help you out.
Give me a clue.
There's a chapter entitled "The Voice of Saruman."
Oh, right. Okay. His manipulation and being able to like overpower someone with his own voice, or just the fact that his voice is so powerful. Try not to listen to his voice because he can manipulate you.
No, I'm just talking about he's a tenor and he's an amazing singer.
He is an amazing singer.
The voice of Saruman.
The voice of
the
Sir
voice of that
Christopher
lad. He's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, the voice of Christopher Lee is incredible as well.
I listened to them.
That.
I'm not sure if I sent them to you or not. Like ages ago, like him singing about the doors of Durin.
You always do that.
I know, yeah. I think, does he have a song about the doors of Durin?
Yeah, he does. It's class.
Oh, it's so cool.
His voice is unbelievable, yeah.
And
we're speaking about Christopher Lee to people now. We're not actually just about Saruman, but Christopher Lee is Saruman, so there you go.
What a perfect casting.
Amazing, yeah. So that is the one power that's like really kind of unique, I suppose, to Saruman. They call it the voice of Saruman,
right, yeah.
and it's and as I said, we get an entire chapter in the Fellowship of the Ring entitled "The Voice of Saruman," and so we know that he could speak to almost anyone on Middle Earth and convince them to do whatever he wanted. And he was just extremely convincing, and he could make anything sound believable. Like he could tell the most staunch atheist that no, there is a God, and that person would immediately join the priesthood. It's just like, all right, okay, I believe it completely, and
it's just Jedi mind tricks. That's what he has, like basically. These are not the gods you are looking for.
Count Dooku, just
yeah, exactly.
Christopher Lee again. So we also see then what Tolkien calls actual spells, when we see that he ensnares the mind of King Theoden of Rohan, where he says the king, quote, fell into decline under the spells of Saruman. So there we actually hear the word spells. So Tolkien, for once, making it more obvious, I suppose. And we don't know if it's because of spells, but he has also convinced all of the Dunlending men to go to war with Rohan. And he also keeps an army of these insane mini monsters in check, including wargs. So he's got to be pretty convincing and powerful and, authoritarian to be able to, lead these types of huge armies and, have them to not have them revolt and not have them kind of turn against him, I suppose.
Yeah, I always thought of that as, I know I forgot it at the time, but the voice of Saruman, when you said like what is his biggest power or something, I was just trying to think of some sort of magic spell thing. But yeah, the whole voice of Saruman thing, I always kind of, even him poisoning the mind of Theoden and him like casting spells on Theoden, but it's all kind of done through Grima in a way, and I always imagined it's like Saruman's voice is so strong it's passing through another person to manipulate Theoden and actually like put a spell on him. And I kind of put that down to the same level of magic and the same kind of way he can convince the Dunlendings to attack Rohan and
like how he eventually like captures the mind of Theoden. It's not just like cast a quick spell on him. It's a lot of like sowing seeds of self-doubt into Theoden, so Theoden just doesn't believe that he's the right man to lead, and he's got like, all this like it's really, really cool. It's way more complex than we just like, and poof, you're under my spell. You know, and again, I remember like I used to think of the voice of Saruman as like he was, you know, really good at hypnosis and you just cast it like put you into a trance. But I'm going to read something here as well, actually a passage from the Tolkien Gateway speaking about his powers. And we're going to see that it's not actually that way. It's not actually just as obvious as hypnosis. It's actually, after reading this, I thought it was kind of cool. It's even better. So reading here from Tolkien Gateway, it says, knowledge of the deep arts or magic, such as it is in Middle-earth, was of particular interest to Saruman, especially when relating to power such as the Rings of Power and the far-seeing Palantiri. He was also deeply learned in ancient lore regarding powerful kingdoms such as Numenor, Gondor, and Moria. His voice and speech were extremely convincing, more powerful than mere rhetoric. When he focused this power on a person or a group of people, he could sway their hearts, plant fears, and sow lies as he pleased. According to the stature of the listener, this spell could last as long as the speech did, or it could take root in them and last forever. Saruman's voice was so powerful that he was able to convince the Witch King that he knew nothing of the One Ring or the Shire. His voice was not hypnotic, however, rather it was persuasive, and the real danger the voice posed to the listener was not them falling into a trance, but agreeing with it. Aside from his voice, Saruman had other subtle abilities such as giving great speed and motivation to his orcs at a distance and setting his will against all those in his dominion that might oppose him. Aragorn takes note of this ability while tracking the party of orcs holding Merry and Pippin hostage. Saruman also seems to be able to move around totally unheard by others, as there are numerous examples of him using this ability. Several examples include him sneaking up on Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas's camp in the Riders of Rohan chapter, this wholly unheard entrance in the Voice of Saruman chapter, and his quiet but sudden appearance to the hobbits in the Scouring of the Shire chapter. Other powers include knowledge of machinery and chemistry, probably separable from explicit magic. For instance, the blasting fire, quote, which was employed by his Uruk-hai army in the Battle of Helm's Deep, was some kind of chemical explosive. His science also extended into biological areas. He is believed to have crossbred men and orcs, creating a new race of orcs unafraid of daylight. The dreaded Uruk-hai, a major improvement on Sauron's thralls who hated daylight. His mannish spies in Bree were said to have orc blood, giving them heightened senses over ordinary men. He also employed scavenger birds in his service. And being regarded as more powerful than Gandalf, at least before Gandalf became Gandalf the White, it's fair to assume he would also wield explicit magic similar to Gandalf, such as artificial light, locking spells, and creating fire, etc. So, as I said, that was from the Tolkien Gateway. So I thought that was pretty cool, especially, we got into more of a list of just his powers there. But at the beginning, speaking about his voice, where he was saying how it's not really, it doesn't put people into a trance. It makes people actually believe what he's saying and agree with him. And so he's just like a really amazing speaker, like a politician or an incredible salesperson or something. You come out of a meeting with a salesperson and be like, no, I need to buy this because
I do want to give him my 2 arms.
Right, yeah. But just like you're like, no, this would be a really good idea to do this. Like, so that's what's really kind of cool.
And like, so, I do think Peter Jackson, obviously, just you have to commend him on everything he's done for the Lord of the Rings. But again, just the casting of Sir Christopher Lee has an extremely powerful voice. But like the things he does, even when Saruman is attacking the Fellowship when they're on Caradhras. And like he's doing it through his voice, and you actually feel the power of his voice. Like Gandalf is like, there is an echo in the air, or someone says there's a fell voice in the air. I can't remember.
Legolas.
Legolas.
Yeah.
And
Legolas.
then Gandalf is like, "It's Saruman," and then he's
That's such a class scene.
yeah, but
You
like,
gotta watch
just
that with like
hearing it.
good surround sound speakers. Like it's just
And like you just feel it's like almost a power of his voice, like coming from his mouth and going all the way to Caradhras. And it's almost like the spell is coming from his own voice, and he's convincing the weather to attack the Fellowship.
it's amazing. Yeah,
How good is that?
I absolutely love the scene when Gandalf arrives at Orthanc as well.
Oh, yeah.
And it's narrated by Christopher Lee. And he's like, "The moon sets on the Shire, and Gandalf the Grey rides to Isengard."
And then it
he's
changes.
like- and then it changes, yeah,
Yeah.
because that's
That's him speaking into a microphone like this, and then it's like, "Is that not why you have come?"
exactly. And he's up on the stairs, like, "Is that not why you have come?
Oh, it's so
my
good,
old friend."
Yeah, I want to watch it right now.
Oh God, yeah. Straight after we record, we're turning on the Fellowship of the Ring.
Marathon.
Yeah, class. So we're nearly there. We're nearly finished. But I want to ask you, what happened to Saruman after he died?
Whew.
And when I say Saruman, I mean his spirit, because we know that he was a Maya or an Istar.
That's a good question. I presume he went to the halls of Mandos, and he at least knocked on the door and asked if he could come in. And he
Went to Nando's.
yeah, they went to the
peri-peri
halls
chicken.
of Nando's. Yeah, and he was let in, and he was forgiven, and they all forgave him. He went to the void.
Now I was just looking into this, and I saw this question asked and answered on Quora.com. So I just stole this answer off a man called Jim Jagielski from Quora. So thank
Nice.
you, Jim, for this answer.
Great centre back for Everton.
Everton centre back, yeah, exactly.
Jagielka.
What was Jagielka? What was his first name?
Jagielka. Oh God, that's a good question. Come back to me. Jim?
I don't remember. Maybe it's the same guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
Jagielka, he spends his time on Quora answering like deep melodical or Lord of the Rings questions.
mythological. Yeah, mythological.
Oh, I can't even think of the word. It's getting late.
Right. Anyway, moving on. So the question: what happened to Saruman after he died? So again, thanks to Jim Jagielski. I'm sorry, Jim, if I messed up your name. Anyway, so in Middle Earth, all beings had souls or Fea, and when great beings died, such as elves or Maiar, their spirits are called to the halls of Mandos for judgment, reflection. Kind of a bit of a purgatory sort of situation going on there. So for men, it's unknown where their spirits go, but it is known that their spirits, their souls, do exist, and it is thought that they escape the circles of the world and venture off into the unknown. Certainly, when Gandalf was slain, this is what happened to his soul, going back to the halls of Mandos, until it was sent back to Middle-earth by Eru Ilúvatar. But this should not be assumed to be the normal action should one of the Istari die. Of course not. They're not all going to just be sent back to Middle-earth. That was special because Gandalf was really the only one that was performing his task well. So it says here, instead, when that bond is broken, the wizard's soul would return to Valinor, but not be allowed to return to Middle-earth. Not as a punishment, but rather a condition of the event that they would no longer be allowed to influence or impact the continuing mission of the remaining Istari. So a normal case if an Istar dies is that he just goes back to the Halls of Mandos and he stays there for purgatory, and he will be judged there. So in Lord of the Rings, it is said that when Saruman was killed, a grey mist appeared rising slowly and looking to the west, when a wind from the west blew and dissolved the mist. Remember, the west is where Valinor is, so it looked to the west, this grey mist, and then it got blown out and kind of just got dissolved by this wind. From this, we can assume that Saruman's spirit attempted to return to Valinor, which, after all, was its home, but was denied due to his failure in his mission. We can further assume that Saruman's Fea was diminished and no longer had the ability to form a body, greatly decreasing his ability to influence the visible world. We could guess that Saruman's spirit, like Sauron's, was left naked in the world, diminished to the point of existing but unable to interact in any significant way. So there you go.
That's
That
nice.
answers that question. There you go. So he just left there floating around. He's just a ghost. He's just a
Yeah.
spooky ghost to haunt Middle Earth for the rest of time, I suppose. To never find rest. So
That's
I don't know.
sad.
Again, that's the answer that I got from Quora.com. If anybody else has a better answer that they would like to send in to us, please get in touch. You'll find all of our links in the podcast description, and you can send us anything there. Send us cake as well. You know, whatever you want.
I
So,
think
yeah.
he probably
So-
possessed somebody else. That's what he did. He went straight into somebody else's mouth and just became. He went into Bull Roarer 2. Oh no, he's long dead. He went into someone's mouth. Who's still around? That's still alive there.
One of the Lobelia Sackville Baggins.
Lobelia. Yeah. Oh, by the way, Phil Jagielka. I remembered it.
Phil,
there.
good man.
Phil.
Good man.
Or
Well done.
Jagielka, as some people
Congratulations.
said. Congratulations. Thank you. Where's my trophy? Phil's probably saying
Remember
the same
that absolute cracker of a goal that he scored towards the end of his career? He scored a goal for 40 yards. And you're like, what is going on? Why was he even attempting that shot?
Probably
Crazy.
even-
Centre back.
thing. Yeah. It was like a company's goal against, was it Leicester at the end of the season to win the league?
To win the league, pretty much. Yeah. I think it might be against Leicester. You might be right. Anyway, so at the end of the day, this is what we know about
nighttime.
Saruman. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's nighttime. So what do we know? What have we learned about Saruman? Hopefully we've learned a couple of things today. So we know that he was originally a Maya who followed Aule the Smith, and it was Aule who was responsible for the crafting of the substances of Middle-earth itself, like the rocks and the soil, the mountains, etc. And he was very skillful with the works of his hands, and you would expect Saruman, as one of his Maiar, to have a good deal of smithcraft himself and to have learned quite a lot. So in Valinor, he was known, as we said, Kurumo. And I didn't tell you, but Kurumo actually means the skillful one. So, of course, we know that Sauron, the Dark Lord, was once a Maya under Aule as well. And he was also well known for his smithcraft. So maybe this is in all way connected or linked. And what we're seeing is that the beings most likely to become corrupt are those who create and craft their own designs. Perhaps creation leads to pride, and pride leads to jealousy, jealousy to anger. And eventually you find yourself all the way down the path of the dark side against Yoda's wishes.
Naked in the dark.
Naked in the dark. And that seems to be what has happened to our man Saruman.
Oh, that's so awful. Or, yeah, like that could be the reason because of creation, but it could just also be maybe Aule was a bad teacher. Maybe he was just a bad
Maybe.
dude.
I mean, yeah, can you imagine how many people did he have in his class, and two of them turned out to be these absolute disasters, you know?
Yeah, like how many bad people are there in Middle Earth? There's Melkor, Saruman, and Sauron, and like two of them had the same chemistry teacher or the same whatever
Yeah.
it was. What was it?
Mountain building teacher.
Mountain.
Oh yeah, I mean, maybe chemistry, woodwork, all that kind of like, you know, hands-on
Hands-on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there you have
So
it.
anyway, yeah, maybe we should investigate Aule.
Yeah.
Maybe
Has anyone
maybe
looked into
he's-
him? Like,
He's got away scot-free.
yeah.
Yeah. That's wrong. So there you go.
Tell me, what words of comfort did you give the halfling before you sent him to his doom? The path that you have set him on can only lead to death.
So that's it, guys. That'll just about do it for another episode of the Council of Elrond. We really hope that you enjoyed this deep dive into the character of Saruman. Hopefully you learned something interesting and had a laugh or two along the way. And please get in touch if you think that we missed out on anything that you would have included, or if you just want to say hello. We'd really love to hear from you on any of our social media, or if you'd like to buy us a coffee. The links are in the podcast description or down below the video in YouTube. And you can also there find our link to our Patreon. You can become a member, and that is really the best way to support us, to give us a couple of euros if you would like to do so. So also thank you so much to all of our members who already do that. You guys are amazing. You are the best. And of course, a big thank you and shout out to Jack Knightley. So remember, if you do go and see us on YouTube, don't forget to give us a like, share, tell your friends, tell your moms, and that's it. Until then, we'll see you next time, guys.
Yeah, guys. Goodbye. Subscribe. Leave a like. Love you.
Bye.